Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on how to secure information in Microsoft Teams. My name is Magnus Goksöyr, and I work as a Microsoft 365 solution architect for the Norwegian consulting company Skill. I mainly work with the implementation of Microsoft Teams for Norwegian companies and organizations. And when you implement something, regardless of whether it's Microsoft Teams or some other IT solution, it is in principle always three things you focus on, and those are strategy, adoption/change, and governance. When it comes to safety, it is something that everyone wants, but few organizations have a truly conscious approach to. The reason for this is probably that they experience security as a complicated area, and many believe that security is just about controlling the access to the data. Well, with the security risks we live with daily nowadays, securing access to files is just one parameter of everything we need to think about. In this session, I'm going to show you some of the areas that are important to think about and a selection of some techniques, concepts, and tools you can use to make the work in Microsoft Teams secure and safe. First of all, why do we use Microsoft Teams and when? Most of us use Microsoft Teams daily to produce, store, share, consume information, and to collaborate with and around it. We have adopted Microsoft Teams so quickly because of the beauty of simplicity. With Teams, we finally got a solution for linking the collaboration around the information with information itself, and also in its proper context. Video conferencing and screen sharing just works, and that's something we have not been spoiled with before, I think. Microsoft Teams has an intuitive and simple interface that is easy to learn. What I like best about Teams is that I can actually work in and from the same workspace all day. There are few times that I have to leave the Teams client to open another system. Everything I need, in addition to dialogues and files, is available in tabs or apps or connectors. Given these points, I'm not at all surprised that so many organizations and companies use Microsoft Teams so much nowadays, and that the usage and creativity is expanding at an increasing rate. And in addition to that, the simplicity and usability are major drivers for the high adoption rate. We cannot omit the fact that COVID-19 brought an involuntary but nevertheless useful viral boost of adoption, and especially when it comes to video conferencing. It's a fact that a large number of organizations and companies are now using Microsoft Teams primarily to conduct video conferences, but they have unfortunately not yet given any thought to whether they have secured their information properly. It doesn't matter how smooth, easy, and user-friendly a tool or solution is if we cannot be sure we can trust it. We need balance. And I think we all are familiar with the classic contradiction, simplicity versus security. Those of you who have met me or heard me before knows that I'm passionate about governance. And governance is a broad concept that really encompasses everything, and thus security. At TeamsFest this spring, I held a session called Microsoft Teams is only part of an implementation of Microsoft Teams. And the purpose then was to show the collaboration in Teams is only a part of Microsoft Teams 365 collaboration, and how to see the whole picture when it comes to effective collaboration. With this in mind, it becomes a matter of course that this and also applies to security. If Microsoft Teams is only a part of Microsoft 365, then the security of Microsoft Teams must also only be a part of the security of Microsoft 365. Today, I therefore want to give you a basic overview of the whole picture when wondering how to secure Microsoft Teams. We must then start by asking ourselves some basic questions. Is our data safe where it is stored and handled? Can our data be deleted or manipulated intentionally or accidentally? Can unauthorized persons access our data intentionally or by mistake? Can unauthorized companies or organizations access our data intentionally or accidentally through the third-party apps we may be using? And can we be sure that our data is stored where it must be stored according to our laws and regulations? And finally, can we with a clear conscience say that we have done everything in our power to ensure that our data is secure. It would be interesting to see how many people raise their hand in answer to this question. Well, would you ask an arbitrary person to deliver an important letter to the post office? You would probably have asked someone you know and trust, and afterwards, you would have liked the person to ensure you that the letter had been delivered. Do you trust everyone who has access to all the messages and documents you work with today? Perhaps, but I don't think you do. You are probably not even completely sure of exactly which people and systems that have access to the information you work with. I work as a consultant, and I'm often asked to assist my customers to secure Microsoft Teams. For me, security awareness is a key focus that all of us consultants must have. We know that security in Microsoft Teams is usually managed and administered elsewhere than in Microsoft Teams. Well aware that there are so many services, settings, and features that go across Microsoft 365, we always need to have the holistic perspective in mind and give the right advice based on that. So let's start with some of the most basic settings we can use and look at the basics for the team owner that he or she can make in a team. First of all, how open should your team be in your organization? Should it be discoverable for all users in your organization? Should anyone in the organization be able to join it as a member without being invited? Should anyone in the organization have access to its files? By choosing private or public when you create a team, you choose the variant that best suits for your team. Note that this setting can easily be changed later if you find that you did not do the right thing from the beginning. How creative should we let users or guests be? Presumably, the team owner has built up an information structure with the relevant channels, and he or she does not want any guests to start redoing this structure. Therefore, I usually recommend that you deactivate this function. What should the team members be able to do? Should a regular member be allowed to add arbitrary apps or connectors? I would not think that the average team member has control over what information exchange takes place between your team's apps and third-party providers. This decision is a responsibility that we should transfer to the security officer or an equivalent role. So I always recommend disabling this feature and instead advise the customer to build a simple custom Power App that everyone can order apps in. The orders can then be sent as an adaptive card to a channel in a governance center so that the security officer can evaluate the request and the app's security to then approve or reject it. Not having overview is a security challenge in itself. Avoid setting unique rights to files and folders in the SharePoint area of your team. Unique file permissions are always difficult to maintain. And if you start with that, you immediately have the same clutter that I'm sure most of us have previously both created and experienced in both SharePoint and on file servers. Now let's take a look at some basic settings in the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. And to be able to configure these settings, you must be a global administrator or a Microsoft Teams administrator. I myself have developed a difficult form of allergy to private channels. If there is an opportunity to hide information, there are always someone who abuses this opportunity. But having that said, you can create private channels and thus have small private areas within a team. But before you might open up for private channels, you should be aware of the consequences that private channels entail from an administration perspective. It actually becomes a security risk in itself when you do not know what information is in a private channel, and maybe even delete a team and important information that is stored in its private channels. So you can use it, but use it with care. Do you need to limit the ability of your users to communicate via Teams with other organizations? Well, you probably don't want to do that, because then your users will only find other tools and create shadow IT. But if it is important to you and you intend to configure it, it is important that you keep in mind that if you add blocked domains, all other domains will be allowed. And if you add allowed domains, all other domains will be blocked. If your organization has no need to include external users or guests in your teams, you can disable guest access. Please note that if you use sensitivity labels in Microsoft Teams, you can, via policies, control which types of teams you should be able to collaborate with guests in. And you can then also control which teams should only be available to users in your organization. We'll talk more about that soon. Now we have seen some examples of the basic settings that everyone should know and configure properly and as needed. So Microsoft Teams is one part of the engine of your organization's vehicle. A basic precondition for you to be able to trust your systems is, of course, that you must have secured all devices you are using. You must also be sure that you handle identities and user accounts in a sensible way. And if that were not enough, you must also trust your network and have implemented the protection you need to keep the bad guys at a distance. As you can see, security in Microsoft Teams is not just about the settings and protection mechanism you can apply in Microsoft Teams. It is important to have the holistic perspective on your entire environment and platform. Now I'll try not to scare you too much, so instead of diving deep into this, we jump quickly into the next slide. So where should we start? Well, you have to ensure that you protect people, devices, applications, and data wherever they are located. This is the core of Zero Trust. Instead of believing everything behind the corporate firewall is safe, the Zero Trust model assumes breach and verifies each request as though it's originated from an uncontrolled network. Regardless of where the request originates or what resource it accesses, the Zero Trust model teaches us to never trust, always verify. Unfortunately, we do not have time in this session to go through the Zero Trust model, but the important thing is that you know the concept and why it is so important. In this PowerPoint, which will be made available to you after the session, you can go through these links to get good info on how to get started with both planning and implementation of Zero Trust. Over to security and compliance. When it comes to security and compliance in Microsoft Teams, it's about safeguarding privacy, meetings and video conferencing controls, identity and account protection, data protection against cybersecurity threats. And there are also support for 90+ predefined regulations, and you can also create internal compliance rules. Security is a broad concept, but when it comes to meetings in Microsoft Teams, we know we have the following tools to work with in order to ensure that our Teams meetings are safe. You can use admin controls and policies to foster safe meetings. You can manage the lobby experience for participants by deciding who can bypass the lobby using granular roles. You can also use hard mute. You can specify who can present and record with meeting roles. And you can control the meeting to ensure that interruptions or disruptive attendees do not disturb the meeting. Communication compliance is an insider risk solution in Microsoft 365 that helps minimize communication risks by helping you to detect, capture, and act on inappropriate messages in your organization. You can use predefined and/or custom policies to scan internal and external communications for policy matches so they can be examined by designated reviewers. And those people can also investigate scanned email, Microsoft Teams, Yammer, or third-party communications in your organization and take the appropriate actions to make sure they're compliant with the organization's message standards. So what about Microsoft Information Protection? It is built-in labeling and protection in Office apps, Microsoft 365 services, Power BI, Edge, and Windows. It's an intelligent accuracy in classification via machine learning-based trainable classifiers and exact data match. It has a unified single admin console to configure and manage your policies and view analytics across on-premises, Office apps, Microsoft 365 services, third-party services via the Cloud App Security and devices. And the SDK extends the protection experience in a consistent way to popular non-Microsoft apps and services. Sensitivity labels has become really useful now that you can use it on Microsoft Teams and SharePoint, of course. You can create a sensitivity label that, when applied during team creation, allows users to create teams with a specific privacy, public or private setting. For example, if you create a label named confidential in the Security and Compliance Center, and you configure teams so that any team that's created with this label must be a private team. When a user creates a new team and selects the confidential label, the only privacy option that's available to the user is private. Other privacy options, such as public and org-wide, are then disabled for the users. Messaging policies are used to control which chat and channel messaging features are available to users, the owners and the members in Microsoft Teams. And you can use the global org-wide default policy that's created automatically, or you can create and assign custom messaging policies. Users in your organization will automatically get the global policy unless you create and assign a custom policy. And you can edit the settings in the global policy to create and assign one or more custom policies to turn on or turn off the features that you want. So what is policy packages? A policy package in Microsoft Teams is a collection of predefined policies and policy settings that you can assign to users who have similar roles in your organization. You use them to simplify, streamline, and help provide consistency when managing policies for groups of users across your organization. And you can use the packages that are included in Teams, and soon you can also create your own custom policy packages. You can customize the settings of the policies in a policy package to suit the needs of your users. And when you change the setting of your policies in a package, all users who are assigned to that package get the updated settings. All these are managed via the Teams Admin Center or via PowerShell. If your organization has data loss prevention or DLP, you can now define policies that prevent people from sharing sensitive information in a Microsoft Teams channel or a chat session. But please note that DLP for Microsoft Teams blocks sensitive content when shared with Microsoft Teams users who have guest access in Teams and channels or external access in meetings and chat sessions. DLP for external chat sessions will only work if both the sender and receiver are in Teams only mode and using Microsoft Teams native federation. DLP for Teams does not block messages in interoperability with Skype for Business or non-native federated chat sessions. So a key takeaway. If I were to give you a key takeaway and one good piece of advice for securing Microsoft Teams, it is to implement zero trust as soon as possible to thereby secure your entire communication platform. As you see, it's a big picture that counts. Everything else comes afterwards. So please focus on Zero Trust, read more about that, and do assessment and implement it. Then you have secured as much as you can. That was all I had for today. I hope you have gotten overview of what options you have when it comes to securing Microsoft Teams, and that the big picture has become a bit more clear. I would like to thank you very much for visiting my session and taking the time to listen.